Welcome to How Luther Became Dugan. This is both Luther and Dugan. We're glad you're checking us out today. Hoping this is the start of many other times checking out the channel, and I'll let this guy, Luther and Dugan, tell you what he's going to do.
Well, if you don't like corny stories and sentimental stories and family stuff, you probably need to not watch this, because this is going to be about just stories that happened in my life, about my growing up, the place that I grew up, the time that I grew up in, and those that were closest to me when I grew up.
Well, Dad, you said this is about family, and I know the first poem you ever did is titled Grandmother, about your grandmother. Is that the grandmother I'm named after?
Right?
All right.
Sure is.
Okay. So you
Yeah.
want to share that poem with us?
Yeah, your great grandmother was named Huldah Olivia, and I had about 10 years old or so. I picked the name out for my firstborn daughter, and I picked Olivia Jill. And I had to make a bargain with your mom when you were born. You didn't have a name for about 3 days because I don't know what she had in mind, but she didn't want to name you Olivia. And so I had to make a bargain with her. I never had anything to do with your other two sisters' names because I bargained that away at your birth in order to get to name you Olivia Jill. I had to give all rights to names thereafter. So
Okay, so Olivia is named after my great grandmother. Where does Jill come from?
oh my, years and years ago when I was little, do you actually know this story?
I've heard it.
There was a comic strip that was called the Jackson Twins. And one of them's name was Jan, and the other one was Jill. And I just fell in love with the name Jill when I was a little boy.
So like a comic strip, like in the Sunday, like
right,
paper
yeah,
strip? Okay.
yeah. On Sunday morning, there would be, back then, there was colored. The only thing that was in the newspaper that was colored then was the comic strips. And the Jackson Twins was one. It was a short-lived comic strip, but it was obviously impactful on me because you're still carrying that name from one of those girls.
But I don't remember that, but I remember newspapers, and I remember the Sunday paper and having the comics in it well, you're right, that was the only part that had color ink. Everything else was just
Right.
the black and white.
So now let me share the first poem I ever wrote. And it was entitled Grandmother. I wrote this poem in 1964 after my grandmother died. As I roam this house so old, I have memories of pure gold, of my grandmother sitting there and the silver in her hair. She was never in the best of health, neither was she blessed with wealth. But if my love was turned to sand, then this world would be all land. One sad day she was put to bed, never more to raise her head. She strived so hard to hide her pain, but her tries were all in vain. Then one day she was put to rest. She's gone to meet her final test. Though her face I cannot see, her presence filled my memory. When at first she passed away, I thought about her every day and wondered how we'd get along without her near to make us strong. She said many things I can't recall, but what I remember most of all were the last words I understood. You and gravy, please be good. Her favorite boy, I guess, was Dwight, and with her he spent many a night. The hardest words I've ever said were Dwight, grandmother, grandmother's dead.
I really like that poem. I've always liked that poem. And in fact, when I was in high school, I remember using that poem. I was taking in one of the English, I think it was my senior year, an English class, and part of the one section of the class was poetry, and we had to come up with a compilation of poems and present it to the class. And I don't remember if it was 3 or 4 poems, but I remember I used Grandmother as one, and the other poem I used was called Kid at the End of the Bench. And I don't remember that poem, but after remembering that right now, listening to you, I'm gonna have to look that poem up and see what that is, and maybe even look up that project, see if I still have those papers. But I remember always liking that poem. And so, going back to family, you make reference to some specific family members in there. Do you want to share with us any of those relationships or how they relate to the poem?
Yeah, I do. The first one I think is gravy, and you're hearing that right. It's gravy, Gravy, gravy. Uh, like a lot of people in the South, that's a beverage. Um, we eat it on biscuits, and we eat it on potatoes. We'll eat it on anything that's on our plate. If we've got gravy, we eat gravy.
It's not a beverage.
It is a beverage some places in the South, I promise you.
Okay.
And but gravy in this case was my uncle. Gravy was my mom's youngest brother, and this poem Grandmother was written about my mom's mom. And the way Gravy got the name Gravy, and in our family anyway, we were, I'm at least half hillbilly, if not more, and they just seemed to always be able to come up with a nickname. Um, and Gravy's name came. It's interesting. He had lots of aliases. When he was born, I think, James Edward Johnson. Then, when he started the school, for whatever reason, I don't know now because the generations before me are gone, um, he went to school as David Glenn Johnson. Well, then his 2 older sisters got married, and in February of 1941, I think he was 10 years old at the time. Um, my double first cousin, that's another story I probably need to tell. My double first cousin, Barbara, was born, and my older brother, she was born in February, and in April, my brother was born. And as little ones oftentimes do, it's hard to say words. And David Glenn, for them, which is the name that all of his family called him, all of his brothers and sisters called him, David Glenn, well, that for those 2 little ones, when they learned to talk, it came out Gravy. So everybody just adopted Gravy. And I never knew him as anything but Gravy. I knew he had other names because my grandmother and granddad, his mom and dad, they never called him anything but Boy. Grandmother, if she was upset, if you heard my grandmother say David Glenn, you knew he was in trouble. Um, but I don't think I ever heard my granddad ever call him anything but Boy. Um, and all of the nieces and nephews, and even his brothers and sisters, called him Gravy. Um, so that's how prevalent nicknames were in our family.
I don't know that I've ever heard you explain that before. I'm sure you have. I just never paid attention. I always thought Uncle Gravy's name was Grady, and it came out Gravy that way. Kids couldn't say Grady; it came out Gravy. So that's I just learned something today. So
Now, in our language, the D and the G sounds alike. I guess I don't know.
yeah.
Now, actually, nicknames didn't have anything to do with your real name, such as Luther and Dugan. I'll get into
Right.
that one day.
Yeah.
But no, nicknames don't have to have anything to do with your real name.
Well, how about the other, you referred to
Okay.
Dwight or?
Yeah, Dwight is your uncle. He was
I know
my
Dwight.
he was my younger brother, and 57, 58, 59, 60. He was 8 years old. No, he was 7 years old when grandmother died, and I remember she was in the hospital, and when we got word, I remember going home, and I guess mom and dad knew it, but I remember Dwight, my little brother, who's 12 years younger than me. I remember telling him, and I'm almost sure it was on the front porch of the house, and I told him that grandmother had died. Now, and she called him, which is a natural nickname, she called him Ike, and she loved for Ike to spend the night with her at her house when he was little. And he loved being down there too.
So on this poem, Dad, you wrote this in 1964, and I've heard this poem all my life. I've been aware of it. When in 1964 you wrote it, when did you share it with Dwight or Gravy or other family?
Um, well, I shared it as my granddaddy, Johnson, her husband, uh, lay in wait in December. My grandmother died January the 25th, 1964. Granddaddy died December the 12th, 1964. And I was living with my aunt 210 miles away from my home. And we got the call um, that night that Granddaddy had died. Uh, we first got a call that he was in the hospital. And that's a story too I'd like to tell one time, but not at this moment. It would take too long. We got the call that night before we went to bed that Granddaddy was in the hospital. And then about 3 o'clock in the morning, we got a call that he had died. And we packed up our stuff and came home. And I remember, and I wish I had this, but I remember going in the kitchen of my grandmother and granddaddy's house and tearing open a grocery bag, an old paper grocery bag like they used, only kind of grocery bag they had at that time. I ripped it, opened it up, and got a pencil, and I wrote this poem. Now I had written at least parts of it, if not all of it, before this day. But I remember going there, sitting down at the kitchen table at my grandmother and granddad's house, and writing this. This is the first thing I'd ever written because I am a terrible speller. Terrible. And I wrote this and read it to some family members, and everybody received it very well, which gave me confidence. Up until this point, I had written things before, but I'd end up putting them away in drawers and eventually just throwing them away because I knew my spelling was so atrocious that in my family, uh, the contents of what I had written would not be the focal point. My misspellings would have been the focal point, and I'd have gotten a lot of teasing about it, and I wasn't ready for that. So I didn't. This was the first thing I ever shared with anyone.
Well, I'm glad you did it. I'm glad you shared it, and I'm glad that your family received it well, and it gave you confidence to write more because I've enjoyed uh, not only your poems but the few short stories that I've read of yours too. So, thank you, Dad.
Well,
Oh, sorry. Good. We're still going. Go.
well, I think probably most people's endure about as much of this as they can take, and so I think I'll end it and tell everybody to be pretty and join us again sometime, please.
All right. Thank you.